We're still here. We didn't get raptured. There was no rapture, although I guess it's possible that there were like 3 nuns off serving a poor somewhere that were the only ones raptured and the rest of us are just in for an ugly time. I don't think that's the case. It's possible, but it's not likely, mostly because the premillennial dispensationalist rapture, this idea that God's people will be taken away in an instant while the rest suffer during a 1,000-year millennium, that's not a real thing. It gets a lot of attention, mostly because of pop culture. And as a result, some people think it's like a core Christian conviction that some churches just talk about more than others. It's not a core Christian tradition. Most denominations do not believe in or affirm the rapture. And you do not have to believe in it to be a follower of Jesus Christ. It is based on a handful of different verses ripped completely out of context. The rapture, as understood today, dates back to around the 1800s, and it's mostly just popular in American evangelicalism and its associated pop culture, like the Left Behind series. Now, to be fair, the doctrine of the Trinity is also not explicitly spelled out in Scripture, but unlike the rapture, there's 2,000 years of theological reflection on the Trinity. So, as long as we're doing some unlearning today, let us turn from the rapture to our gospel story. It's a famous one, right? Full of potent and powerful imagery. It is the story of a transgender man who lay outside the gates of Elon Musk's house. Right? Or was I not paying attention? The story of a black guy who lay outside the gates of white supremacist Nick Fuentes' house. That closer? The story of a queer kid who lay outside of Jerry Falwell's house. Story of an immigrant who lay outside the gates of, let's just say, a guy's tower, right? The story of a neurodiverse person who lay outside the house of the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Maybe it's all of those things and none of them. Today's reading is Jesus' parable of Lazarus and the rich man. And Lazarus, this poor man, lays at the gates, the dogs licking his open sores, doubly unclean. And while the rich man lives inside, feasting sumptuously and thinking God must have blessed me. But note that, unlike all of my little incorrect translations, Jesus gives a name to the poor man and not to the rich man. And Jesus tells this parable to Pharisees who were lovers of wealth, who were ridiculing him for saying, "You cannot serve God and wealth." That sounds familiar. I think I've seen Christians like that on Instagram. Instead, Jesus says, wealth is addictive and bad for your psyche, for your spirituality, bad for your soul. And that message, I think, is pretty consistent from the prophets up through Jesus. Now, in Jesus' parable, Lazarus and the rich man both die and go somewhere. But not hell, at least not as we popularly understand it. The word in today's reading is Hades. This was the Greek underworld, the place of mythology and legend. It is different from Sheol, which is a Hebrew term for the grave, going to the grave. It's also different from Gehenna, which we see in scriptures. That was a very real place outside of Jerusalem where trash was tossed and caught on fire and was sort of constantly burning. It was the dumpster fire of antiquity. These terms all meant something very specific in the culture of Jesus' time. And here Jesus says Hades. In verse 23, it says, the rich man, who's in Hades, mind you, looks up and sees Lazarus and Abraham. And they're far away across a great chasm, but the story implies they are also in Hades. And if this is hell, if this is a place of eternal punishment after God's final judgment, that doesn't make sense that Lazarus would be there. Well, some people will say in response, well, the chasm here actually refers to the distance between heaven and hell. And that's where Lazarus is, in heaven looking down. I don't buy that. It doesn't fit the story in my mind. It also, my vision of heaven does not involve sitting around watching people I knew in this life being punished for all eternity, even folks I don't like. It doesn't seem very Christ-like to imagine drawing pleasure from someone else's pain for all time. So I think instead we should take a moment and picture for me a waiting room. Not a nice waiting room. Think like a waiting room at a DMV, okay? The only lights there are those really harsh fluorescent lights, blinding, and they have an audible whine. One's just blinking on and off intermittently. There's no airflow. The room is hot and stuffy. You can smell mold and most of the people in the room. The chairs seem to be almost deliberately uncomfortable. And there is an out-of-order sign on the only water fountain. Now imagine your waiting room that you're in has a window to a hallway. And across the hallway, there's another window, and from there you can see into another waiting room. But that one is more like one of those fancy, dope, luxury airport lounges. Waiters are bringing people ice water and gourmet food. They've got like throw pillows and blankets and televisions, and it's lovely. The image we get here is not of eternal torment versus eternal bliss. It is waiting in torment versus waiting in comfort. It is an underworld until the day of judgment, until the day when God makes all things new. And I'm not saying that torment sounds fun in any way, right? But you shouldn't use this story to concoct a vision of endless tortures for all time. The modern notion of hell, this place of eternal suffering, is, as I like to say, medieval fan fiction. Much of what we think hell is actually comes from the Inferno by Dante Alighieri. The symbols and imagery of Dante's epic poem, Suffering Forever, Cruel and Unusual Punishments. These things have shaped our imagination and defined over the centuries what Christians think and teach about what hell is. And even there, the irony is that Dante is profoundly misunderstood, because people grabbed at the symbols and they missed his core message. In his narrative, it turns out that the gates of hell are wide open. Anyone can walk out, no more torture, anytime they want. But they don't. And that is his core point. To do so, to walk out through these open gates, they would have to let go of whatever the driving fixation was that ruined their lives and now threatens to ruin their afterlife. So, for instance, someone who was addicted to people-pleasing in life is constantly trapped in a cycle seeking the approval of somebody who has never been able to find anything nice to say about anybody ever. A guy who was obsessed with money now hoards the wealth that is being given to him by somebody who constantly kept spending money trying to find happiness and could never buy happiness. In Dante's story, then, they're trapped as they lived. They haven't learned their lesson. They won't let go, so they cannot walk free. And interestingly, we see the same thing with the rich man here. He sees Abraham, and he could ask for anything. But you know what he asks for? For the poor man, Lazarus, to be his errand boy, to come serve him water, to go off and send a message to his brothers. This dude has not learned a thing. He still thinks he's better than Lazarus because he had money. He is trapped in the conviction that his valuables make him more valuable. So we go back to the unlearning. Much of what we imagine about heaven and hell is Dante with a little bit of Greek Platonism thrown in. I believe when we die, we go to be with Jesus. The awe-inspiring fire of his love may feel like comfort or burning, but it is the fire of love and not vengeance. The idea of a God who punishes eternally is not consistent with a God who is love, as our Bible tells us. I think heaven is a time outside of time, constantly breaking into this world in unexpected ways, pockets where the now feels worthy of forever. And so the most biblical view of the end, I guess, is not a rapture followed by tribulation or forever separation into eternal life up there and eternal torment down there, but a sort of mystery of waiting with Jesus until God makes all creation new, until a day of full bodily resurrection. And I understand that that's a hard pitch for modern ears, modern people who understand science. But if we're going to ask modern people to get behind something that they find slightly implausible, we should actually base it on something that's in the Bible and not Dante or Plato. Fundamentally, I don't think this story is actually about the afterlife at all. It's just misemployed by a lot of preachers who want to preach hellfire. Jesus isn't giving us doctrine here. He's not trying to make a theological argument. He's using the images that were common in his time to tell a story with a moral lesson. Usually, he says, we already know the right thing to do. We just don't want to do it. There are some really confusing moments in life. Times that call for prayer and reflection and discernment. Absolutely. But a lot of the time, we know what the right thing to do is. We have Moses and the prophets, and we today have Jesus. We know we should apologize when we did something wrong. We shouldn't cheat. We shouldn't gossip. We shouldn't yell in anger. We shouldn't have that 8th glass of whiskey or skip work to get high. We know we could eliminate homelessness for basically what we just gave Immigrations and Custom Enforcement. We know that if we are rich in material or in whiteness or in straightness or in education, we should use that richness to help the world around us instead of daydreaming about getting flown away. We know. We just don't do it. And it is not, he implies, a lack of knowledge. That's an excuse. It's a lack of willpower. We don't do it because it is easier not to, because it feels better now, and we don't want to think about tomorrow. We know the right thing to do, but we lack the will to do it. And funny enough, that is what Dante gets right. Not all the horrors and the punishment that people latch onto, but this truth about human nature. We all have these things that we believe we cannot live without. We think we cannot survive without them. We are functionally addicted to those things. We functionally worship those things. And we have to go through what feels like death, what feels like dying, what feels like letting part of your identity go away. And we can only do that. We can only die to those things if we truly believe, deeply believe, that there is resurrection on the other side of that it's not a final and permanent sort of death. We die to the powers, and we are raised with Christ. That's how Paul puts it. We can worship Mammon, or we can worship God, but not both. That's how Jesus puts it. By the grace of the Spirit, by dying and rising with him, we can share in the faith of Jesus. We can share in the willpower he had. We can share in the courage he had to do the right thing. Not just blind obedience, but the courage to look at a world that can be ugly and evil and wrong and say, I'm going to stand up for love in the midst of it, even if I have to suffer for it. When it feels like we don't have the power within us to do something, we can share the willpower and courage of Jesus Christ. And it means we can look to his life, to his teachings, to his example, and we can say, this is pretty clear. Now, God, I pray that you will grant me the power to actually go do it. So let us leave with that lesson today. Not to see God as a tyrant who demands we fall in line. Not to seek a rapturous escape from God's creation. Not to fear eternal punishment for every little mistake. But to trust the love of Jesus Christ. Christ who calls us to let go of the things we are clinging to that we think we cannot live without and risk becoming the person God created us to be.